This is GARIS Essays, that is 2-3-page essays on such topics as species dominance, the global state, politics, femtotech, religion, society, and education. This essay is from section B on the global state, that I call GLOBA, and the title is The VPNers, the true heroes of today. Essay itself. Let's make it a bit bigger. The VPNers, the true heroes of today, by Prof. Dr. Hugo degaris. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I have a strong admiration for the VPNers. A VPN is an acronym for a virtual private network. That is, a computer and software system that allows a user to circumvent the software firewall installed by dictatorial governments to prevent their citizens from accessing content on the internet that the dictatorial governments do not want their citizens being influenced by. For example, the brutal dictatorship of China, which does not want its citizens being influenced by democratic ideas from the West. So Western internet services and many Western websites are blocked in China by the government's Great Chinese Firewall. At the time of writing, that's May 2020, there are nearly 1 billion Chinese who have access to the internet, mostly with cheap smartphones. I also read that 1/3 of these Chinese internet users, that is about 300 million Chinese, that is about the same population size as that of the US, use VPNs to go around to avoid the censorship of the CCP, that's Chinese Communist Party. This has enormous significance for what I call the de-dictation of the planet, that is, getting rid of the last dictatorships on the planet. The worst example being, of course, the hated Chinese Communist Party, which is truly a bunch of thugs. I will talk more about the CCP's thuggery a bit later, but the theme of this essay is the heroic role played by the makers of the VPNs, whom I label the VPNers, pronounced VPNers, that's ERS. I believe that it is this tiny handful of software and hardware developers who are playing a critical role in bringing down the last dictatorships, especially the worldwide hated CCP, which dictates and brutalizes the lives of over 1 billion of the Earth's citizens, that is, the Chinese population. Why do I consider these VPNers heroes? Because they make it possible for the smartest 300 million Chinese to access the internet of the world and hence be influenced by Western democratic ideas. In fact, in today's world, parliamentary democracy is no longer solely Western. It started in the West, initially in ancient Greece. Now, there are some 130 countries in the world that are parliamentary democracies of various shades. Half the countries of the world, that is about 100 of them, have switched from one-party dictatorships to multi-party democracies with regular elections over the past 50 years, so that their voting populations have the right to vote out of power a government that the people feel has become unfit, too incompetent to stay in power. The existence of the popular vote forces governments to stay on their toes. Otherwise, if they become too corrupt, too lazy or incompetent, they risk being voted out of office. Advanced democracies, experience shows, do not go to war with each other. So if all countries could become advanced democracies, then we could live in a war-free world, in which the planet would not be wasting several $1 trillion a year on arms, which profits from the sale of death in the infamous arms trade. The arms trade is a greater moral abomination than was Negro slavery, because at least it was in the self-interest of the slave owner to keep his slaves alive, because there is no profit in a dead slave. Whereas the arms trade is about selling arms to kill people. It's the death trade, a far worse moral abomination. I dream of the creation of a global, democratically elected state that I call Globa. G-L-O-B-A. The alternative to a democratic world state is a Jewish bankster-controlled NWO, that's New World Order, which would be run according to how the Jewish banksters want. That is, it would be a planet controlled by them, where they are the dictators, robbing the world population, keeping the population down with ignorance, poverty, repression, terror, and disease. I have a hatred for Jewish banksters and their dream of creating a NWO. I see them as the greatest criminals against humanity in history, and hence the most hateable. I also have a hatred of the CCP, which currently controls a fifth of humanity, that is, the Chinese population. The CCP is a bunch of thugs. As proof of this, look at their Lao Gai, that is, the Chinese equivalent of the gulags, that is, slave labour camps of political prisoners made infamous by Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago of Stalin's Russia. Russia got rid of its gulags decades ago, but China, the political pygmy, still has them, in fact over 1,000 of them, says Harry Wu, the founder of the Laogai Museum in Washington, D.C., who spent 19 years of his life in the Chinese Laogai for making a negative remark about the Chinese communist dictator Mao Zedong when he was an undergrad student. Understandably, he has a hatred of the CCP and wants it overthrown. So do I. In order for the world to live in a fully democratic globe, the last of the dictatorships will need to be removed. That is, the process of de-dictation mentioned earlier. I see the VPNer playing an essential role in that de-dictation, and hence in building a vital stepping stone for the creating of Globa, in which there will be no more wars, no arms trade, no poverty, no ignorance, with everyone getting an education to the limit of their ability, with the whole planet being much richer and a lot happier than today. That is my dream. I am a globist, believing in globism, that is, the desire to create a fully democratic global state. But getting rid of the last dictatorships, particularly the CCP in China, will not be easy. The Chinese are the smartest large population in the world, with an average IQ of 105. They are as smart as Germans. Fortunately for the world, the intellectual repression of the CCP keeps China's sages, that is intellectuals, intellectually sterile. For example, China has won a pathetic 1 Science Nobel Prize. A lot of China's intellectual energy is caught up in suppressing and policing its own population. The CCP spends more money on internal, that is within China, suppression of its own people than it does on its external defence, which shows clearly how paranoid the CCP is of its own population, and for good reason. Every year now in China, there are some 200,000 violent demonstrations that are put down by the Chinese, in brackets, militarized police. My second Chinese wife, in brackets, I lived 12 years in China from 2006 to 2018, close brackets, told me that amongst her professorial colleagues, there was a consensus that the greatest fear today of China's president, Xi, in brackets, pronounced Xi, that's spelled X-I, as in he and she, Jinping, was of the young generation of Chinese. That is, he feared that the young generation of Chinese no longer believed in communism. who felt that the CCP had no legitimacy, that is, had no right to rule, and should be replaced by a democratically elected government. The fact that there are soldiers with guns all over China now, especially in Beijing, around the traditional and historical meeting place for political and social movements, that is, Tiananmen Square, shows how paranoid the CCP is now feeling, having to wrestle daily with the fear that their whole social system in China could unravel quickly if the political repressive lid is not held down tightly. But that political suppression then only helps build up the popular pressure for democratization, leading to an explosion sooner or later, which will probably result in a Chinese civil war, killing millions, before a new China can emerge that is modern, civilized and humane, unlike the current bunch of thugs in the CCP who practice live organ harvesting, which is so horrific that it's hard to imagine that it is really happening. This is the end of part 1.